Hello, everyone. This discussion will be concerning the article about debating and how that can be used in classes. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up an app share, which will allow you to see my desktop. And the desktop you'll see will be the article I have open. So definitely make sure you run the wizard with all cases of the virtual classroom, because as of right now, you're going to get a pop-up, and that pop-up will be me sharing. All right, so I should have the app share running, and you should be able to see that. I'll make sure I have everything works. Wimba is pretty good. It just has a delay a little bit, so I'll try to go through everything kind of in a slower pace. All right, so what we have here is we have an article from the CJLTR-CAT, which is the Canadian Journal of Learning and Technology. And then it has French because, remember, in some areas in Canada, they have to have things in multiple areas, multiple languages, which is French and English. So this is the article that you're able to review and read, and it's very simple. So I'm going to open up an article, the same article that I have my comments written on, so you can see sort of the way I interpreted it. So we'll just go through this case by case and line by line on the article. The first thing it says is the abstract, and the abstract says that this reflective case study was based on our independent use of the debate as an online instructional approach. They used narrative inquiry and action research. And they also said that the field of research on faculty self-evaluations of teaching strategies, specifically debates. So as you read this article, you saw that it was really a narrative-based action research. And you'll see that whenever, because they later on discuss how they did this, and the way they did this was pretty much putting 3 professors' experiences, and then they had them write some comments, and they would call each other and talk, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So the abstract talks about that this is going to be based on looking at debates, and they looked at just a real simple process, a real simple research article. Their resume then is in French. It says resume, which I guess is abstract. I don't know. I can't speak French or read it. The introduction says that educators in online and distance education institutions are always searching for innovative and effective ways to help students learn. So while some teaching strategies can be modeled after those used in traditional classrooms, others require a bit more work to be adapted to the online environment. This paper tells a story of how 3 academics independently attempted to adapt the use of debate as a teaching strategy for use in an online learning environment. So just from this paragraph alone, we see that there is an attempt by the authors to transition some traditional, which they classify the word traditional, which would be a classroom in which you meet face-to-face. And they're trying to move some of these instructional techniques that they have into the online realm. And this article particularly deals with just the area of debate. So how can you make students debate online? All 3 faculty members from the same distance education institution, and then now it starts talking about who these faculty members are and what they did. And it's, so if you're looking at a traditional research paper, this would be sort of the subjects of the research. and it talks about how the three faculty members, one was in, it says nursing, psychology, and business, and they use distance education technology. Each of us has conducted and continues to conduct research with colleagues that we have either way never met in person or whom we have met infrequently. In this paper, our focus is on exploring our individual motivations to use the debate and the opportunity to compare and contrast our experiences. So that would be this statement right here. Whenever we're looking at any kind of educational research, seems to me as a purpose statement. So you could say in this paper, our purpose is to explore our individual motivations to use the debate. The next paragraph talks about who they are, who these three people are, and it talks about is a 14 weeks long, and that they use the Moodle, which is an open source learning management platform. I did not underline the word open source, which is right here. Open source is kind of a software program where what it means is like the source code. So Windows would be a closed source that Microsoft owns that code on how to create that software. So open source would be where other people know the source, and that way people can use it and make it better. Mozilla has always argued that they are an open source software, which is why it's free. So if everyone can use it and build it and make it better, then it would be stronger, is the statement. But that's what open source means. If you saw that, you kind of might have went like, what's that mean? So now you see what open source is. But extensive literature abounds on online distance education as well as on teaching strategies. Okay, now that sentence right there is very loaded as I saw it, because it says extensive literature abounds on online distance education. Okay, well, that kind of tells me that this author is not going to do a major lit review on why distance education is important. Kind of glad they're not, because distance education can be good if it's done right. I hear a lot of students who will say, I've signed up for a distance education course at the University of, fill the blank. And then they say, well, I hated it. It was not a fun class because the professor never commented. All we did was do homework assignments in the assignment tab, and it was really never any fun. And it was just grading papers. And that's one reason why distance education has kind of gotten a bad name, is because some of the teaching strategies that we use in our classrooms, which would be direct instruction, group work, debates, and using technology, are lost in the transition to online lectures. And this is something that people, professors just kind of throw up a class, and they'll throw up some assignments, they'll throw in some readings, and the students really miss that teaching moment. So, is online distance education bad? The answer would be no. Is it being done poorly? The answer would be yes in some cases. And it depends on the university. And several universities are getting their hands slapped on poorly created distance education programs that are not being accepted for review by organizations such as NCATE and SACS. So that sentence right there tells me that the author is not going to discuss the idea of distance education. If you ever see me do this, I apologize. I'm making sure that the lot talk is still going. I don't want to do a lecture for 20 to 30 minutes and realize that I didn't record my voice, which I have done that many times, and it is frustrating to say the least. I've done many lectures 2 or 3 times. The next sentence says, we begin with a brief literature review on online distance education, teaching strategy, and online debates, focusing specifically on the pedagogy of using debates in higher education. So they're kind of saying that we're not going to focus too much on some of the lit review on that. So as you go into the lit review, so now you've read 2 pages of the article, you kind of get a feeling of this, of where it's going, and then you go into the lit review. And the lit review says, distance education and teaching strategy. So as you read this, this is where you see a lot of the good research in here. You see Moore 91, Hamazee 2005, Clark, and Bonas and Emery. But as you scroll down, as you read this, you start getting some more of the heart of it. Key elements of an effective online educational experience were outlined in 2001. The community of inquiry model has been the subject of many research papers which substantiate the importance of design and interaction in online education. So design and interaction is very important on the online education world. Bowles and Day in 2011 demonstrated that the use of the COI, which they call the Community of Inquiry Model, framework to redesign courses helps to improve students' outcomes. In developing his ideas about online assessments, Gayton describes the need for online courses to accommodate combinations of social rapport building, instructional design for learning, enhanced interactivity through technology, and learner-initiated interaction. So if we just look at the COI model, the Community of Inquiry model, and we look at what I'm doing right now, there would not be social rapport building in here. However, you would say, well, I'm listening to the professor's voice and I'm watching some of the lecture. Instructional designs for learning, this would be kind of an instructional design because it's based on direct instruction. Enhanced interactivity through technology, yes, because these articles, sometimes when you walk into a classroom and the professor talks about research that he's found, then you do not get copies of that article. But by doing my courses and this setup, you would have more interactivity through the technology because you can have your article sitting there, you can read your article, and then you can compare it with what I've read. And learner-initiated interaction. Not yet, but you would see that later on, possibly in the form of a quiz or an interactive assessment. So therefore, the idea of what the COI model is important, but you'll notice that some professors may not do that. We also continue to see a shift in the research literature showing online education to be a more learner-centered than instructor-centered. I agree with that completely, and you see the research that backs that. They have two major research articles from that. So I actually do agree with that, and that's something that I started doing with a lot of my hybrid classes and my online courses, is I started putting lectures online that students say are boring. You can be the judge of that. But you put lectures online, but instead of making the class meet at 4 o'clock on a Thursday or 6 o'clock on a Thursday, the students are able to listen to a 1 hour or 1.5 hour lecture or a combination of lectures that make for a certain amount of time at their own discretion. So you try to take that learning experience where they would have in a classroom and make it more user-friendly. But then you combine that because whenever they're in the classroom, you can determine if people are asleep in class or if people are not paying attention. So to do that, you're going to have to, the online experience is going to have a couple of more assessments or checks and balances. Where on a lesson plan with Bloom's or depth of knowledge or core curriculum, you would do the Madeline Hunter way of doing a set, and then you would also say, well, we're going to have a teacher observation here with a checklist or a rubric to make sure my students are learning. But with online, you really cannot have that teacher observation because your students are at the house. So to solve that, you would have to have more assessments in place. So that is why I would agree with that statement there, that research literature is showing online education to be more of a learner-centered, which is true because you get to sit down, you get to make your own decisions on what you want to learn that day. So I agree with this research piece. If anyone wants to try to pronounce that name, they can. Paul and Mukahapahe, in their literature review of educational technology, claim that using technology can be helpful in supporting communication and information retrieval skills. So this would mean that using technology can go to another level of learning or a higher level. Some students who are hesitant to participate in classroom discussions or to contact their instructor are more likely to become involved online. But then you have to think, another follow-up question would be, are students who are willing to participate in classrooms hesitant to be online? So is it an opposite effect? And the research doesn't mention that. The pedagogy of using debates in higher education. So at this point, they've kind of talked about, for the first a couple of paragraphs, the importance of online instruction. And at this point, now they're going to talk about using debates in higher education. So you see the review of literature has a flow to it. Debates is one type of active learning tool that promotes critical thinking. Now, this research is kind of new. It's a 2007, so we're within a decade on that, so that's good. Critical thinking has been defined in many ways, but one comprehensive definition is created from a review of literature that covers all aspects. So from this point, that's why I've got the arrow here, we're going to get a good definition of what critical thinking skills is. And we hear a lot of critical thinking topics, especially today with state tests and stuff like that. Critical thinking basically involves a set of skills, such as analyzing, arguing, synthesizing, evaluating, and applying, and the use of these skills to guide behaviors. Students tend to enjoy debating, and thus they are more likely to be engaged to remember the material. The ability to see different sides of an issue and to evaluate each objectively is the hallmark of science. A survey of recent graduates found that developing analytic thinking skills was among the most useful aspects of their degree. And then Galloway asserts, it is unsurprising that many debaters contend that debate is one of the most educationally valuable experiences of their lives. And that's something that we, and it says in the next paragraph, debate triggers higher order learning, analysis, synthesis, evaluation. Helps students learn to read critically and to write critically. The process encourages empathy in that participants need to understand how others think. Helps to increase students' open-mindedness, tolerance, and many even decrease incidents of violence. And, we don't have to beat a dead horse because that would be an act of violence. But, sorry, the jokes get bad, especially online. But actually, I actually read there, it says debate does not equal violence. So you can actually reduce violence by having people discuss things. Whenever I was in school, we always debated stuff such as abortion and elections. And it seems like whenever you discuss elections, people get upset. But if people are good at it and they understand all the facts, then, that's good. Look at all the Republican debaters and the Democratic debaters. Look at whoever, any kind of politician that's running for office, is whenever you see their ability to make a debate, what you don't see is they see both sides of the story. So if you're running for governor as a Democrat, you also understand the Republican Party because you have to understand both sides to have a good debate. So we don't need to stress this too much. You can see what all I underlined here. Their review of literature is very powerful because they're saying over and over again that debate is good, and we all know that. Debaters come to realize that positions other than their own have value, and that reasonable minds can disagree on controversial issues. I see a lot of this in the history classes, is whenever you get to history classes, you see a big debate on religion, and you really can't avoid that in a high school setting. People say, well, you can't teach religion in school. Well, if you can't teach religion in school, then you really can't teach the subject of history because history is full of religion, religious wars, crusades, everything. There's always a religious atmosphere of that. And you really can't teach a world history without discussing people like Martin Luther and John Calvin. And when you look at John Calvin, you see that John Calvin has the most famous doctrine, which is Calvinism, or the idea of a predestination, an idea that everything is mapped out for you. And that really needs your students to have a moment to think about that when you're talking about Calvinism versus free will, students need to be able to have a debate over that because sometimes students will realize that they're wrong. And sometimes students realize that they're right. Or sometimes they realize, which is the case with many religions, is I don't know. So that's the whole idea is students have, and that's when I put that little line there, a moment of clarity. Sometimes you go, wow, man, maybe I need to see that point from another angle. And I don't agree with you, but I see where you're arguing from. And I'll say that if you ever get in a debate with me, and you ever meet me and we're talking and there's a good debate, then if I look at you and I say we're just going to have to agree to disagree, then what I'm saying is I see your stance, but you're not going to move me from my stance. And it's kind of, when you say that to somebody, it's actually a pretty honorable thing. Some people get upset when they take it in a hard way, but if you say I just agree to disagree, then that's saying, it's better than saying, hey, you're wrong. Then you're not seeing the clarity of that. There's a nice little paragraph here from Hearn of 1986. Debate experience gives the students some perception of how knowledge must be sought, not only from empirical research, but also from critical analysis in an argumentarian format. Students learn not only how social scientists gather and analyze data, but how research can be used to support arguments, and how to deal with the conflicting results often obtained. I had a good friend of mine who's passed away recently at an early age, but he never really saw my religion as equal. So we would always have really good debates, really long-lasting debates, and so that was always something that was always fun to have. But to do that, you have to have information and data. Debates in online environment. So now you see that they've done their review of it. So they have completed most of their review of it. They've talked about why online is really good. And then they started dabbling a little bit on the world of debate. So now the next thing we need to look at on this review of it is debates in an online environment. So they said structured debates have been used to an advantage in the classroom. Adapting the technique for online teaching can pose a challenge. So how can we take debates and move them into an online field? They really don't discuss much of that, and that was one of the weaknesses I saw in this article, was they really do not discuss a large amount of ways to do that, how you can do online debates. They say, they give us a couple of paragraphs, and that's what they kind of just say. So I guess what they're trying to say is there's not much research on that area. So debate's good, but how do we do it online? So what they decided to do, and this is where you see the methodology, this is their method of their research. They decided to do a case study, and the case study they decided to do would be a case study based on their own selves. So their research question, what they were trying to prove or disprove, was that the introduction of debate in online classes would be positively perceived as a teaching strategy by the faculty involved. Now, I don't want to slam their research, but you're looking at 3 subjects, and one of them is pretty much the author. And I believe this article has 3 authors, so pretty much the research is about all 3 authors. So, okay. And their research question was that online courses would be positively perceived by the faculty. Okay, so this research, it passed peer review, but you see that this is a very unique case study, we would say. Prior to undertaking this narrative case study, so this is a qualitative study, we consulted the University Research Ethics, which is also, that's why I wrote the line IRB. And what IRB means is Institutional Review Board, and they actually consulted with the IRB and just wanted to make sure that if this was okay to do, and they said it was fine. As we scroll down, the data for analysis are the stories themselves, their meaning to the storyteller, and the reconstruction of that meaning by the researchers. They used an item called triangulation. If you'll recall, triangulation from any research class you've used is we're using multiple sources to try to get to the data. So if someone said, I saw the car driving real fast, and then you have a security camera where the car was driving fast, and then you have an eyewitness who says, yeah, I have a radar gun and the car was going 56 miles an hour, then you've used triangulation. You use more than one source. In this example in this case study, they discussed their triangulation and how they did it. They did a conference call, they did writing individually reflective narratives, and then they read and they reflected on each other's individual narratives. So they would discuss it, and then they would write about it, and then they would pass their journals to one another. Our first data set consisted of the narrative stories we had written and shared about how we use debates in our courses. So then it talks about, and if you look to the right, I have written data collection. And that's what they're talking about in these paragraphs, is how they collected data. So you can explore that and see how they wrote it. They're talking about writing up mashup papers, sitting down and talking about all this. So now we have what is known as data analysis. The case study analysis says, earlier in this paper, we indicated that educational research and evaluation has advanced beyond critiquing the merits of distance education. So what does that sentence mean? That sentence says that, it says, earlier in the paper, we indicated that educational research and evaluation has advanced beyond critiquing the merits of distance education. Okay, now if I read that sentence and I was like, okay, that's a weird sentence to say. So what? Because so if you go up into the original part of the article that we've already discussed, they really don't say that. But what they're trying to do is they're drawing a line. They're drawing a line on this research article, and they're saying, we are not going to discuss whether distance education is a good thing or a bad thing. We're just saying it's good. Let's discuss debates in it. So that's a bold statement to make, and I don't like that transitional sentence because it says that earlier in the paper, well, they only discussed it for one sentence. So, okay, but I don't really have an objection to it because we know that distance education really is a good system. So anyway, that's why I underlined that sentence, and I put on the right, distance education is separate, because they're drawing a line in the sand and saying, we're not talking about all that. So I'll leave it with that. What we focused on instead were the similarities of perceptions we all held towards the teaching strategies when used in our courses. So whenever they taught this debate, what were their three perceptions? Discuss their subjects again. This is something that was unique. I don't want to make anything big of this, but you'll notice they say right here, they said the reflection and self-evaluation regarding our experiences as three women. So that would be a gender issue right there in research, that all three of the professors who were doing the online were all three women. Nothing wrong with this, nothing positive with this, but how would male professors perceive online? I don't know, and that'd be something very interesting. We do know that studies show that women have better abilities with technology at the onset. So would men be more reluctant to handle online debates? We don't know, and this is beyond this research study. But that was one thing they mentioned over just two words, and I underlined that because I said, okay, we've got a what's that word? That word is a homogeneous group of subjects, and that's something that researchers would definitely red flag. So if you're going to do any research off this, a springboard, I'd probably look at other gender groups, so I would diversify my subjects. So this is how you should read a research article. You definitely want to catch little things like that. So as we continue on, I put a big block around this page because this is the method. And it talks about and that was another weird part of the study, is you had different subjects. You had a psychology professor, a nursing professor, and a business professor. So you see where it's kind of going in different angles. So this is our method. You continue on. You see a peer evaluation technique was also used, whereby the students evaluate each team member. So this was a little bit of the quantitative aspect of this study, is they, instead of just doing the narratives of the professors, they also did a peer evaluation technique was used for the students to see what the students thought of that. The psychology course says, as the logistics did not allow a group debate, an assignment in which each student debated him or herself was created. Information retrieval to learn how and where to find the peer-reviewed articles. And so whenever they were doing this debate structure, they were determining how they can make a debate how do you do a debate in an online class? And what they decided to do was they decided to make the person debate themselves, which I thought that was kind of cool. So instead of having a debate against other students on online, which you really can't do, they're going to make the students do research on peer-reviewed articles, do an annotated bibliography, and then finally do a position paper, and that's how they were going to do the debate. So is that a definition of a debate? I don't know. And that would be something that I would like we could ask you later on in one of our assignments is, if you think about that, is it a debate to debate yourself? And that's what they had them doing in this study. This is the results section. They said some comments in here that I kind of circled. It says the general student feedback results. General student feedback on the use of debates in 2 of the faculties have been positive. In 2 of the faculties has been positive, all right? The psychology course has just begun, so student feedback is not yet available, all right? So they mentioned feeling more engaged in the course, indicated the debate enabled them to take a side, but they used the word a few indicated and some, and I was like, well, I don't like that. So the results are kind of mixed here because you're seeing that 2 of the faculty members' students' feedback were available. 1 of them was not. They did not mention any negatives, which was kind of weird, and I wish they had. So the results are kind of out there, and you see where they are. Their discussion, which is what you have after you do your results, is you do a nice little discussion section, which discusses what I learned in this whole paper. And the discussion says that all 3 of us know that the debate was not a prevalent technique in the courses within our faculties. So that the debate was not used a lot with other professors. They also found that there to be a marked difference among ourselves regarding the debates. We approached our respective debates very differently. So debates differed among each professor and how those 3 professors did theirs. We assigned different weights to the debate in our courses. So once they decided we're going to do debates, and then they went out and did the debate, each one of them did it differently. The subjects differed. They put this out. You have 30.9 female, 33.1 male. 85% of the psychology students were female. In contrast, the MBA courses were made up of 30. So the subjects were a little bit different. This next section is what many people do in a qualitative research article, and this consists of giving out quotes and giving out different sections of what came from this. And that's what many people do whenever they're doing a qualitative research study, is you want to bring out the quotes that came from this. Our nursing faculty reflections in our final mashup said, so this is what the professor who was in charge of nursing said, even though we come from different disciplines, we are kindred spirits and all believe that debate as an online course is a good thing. Although we each had a reason for introducing the debate into our courses, we were not consciously mindful about the process that the students were experiencing. We see from personal experience that there are many ways to structure online debate to fit different student presence and learning management systems. So you see these different matchups here. Both of the others agree with this, they said. I was like, okay. And then it continues on with their results. Their conclusions are, we learned that overall, despite our different approaches to the debate and despite our different backgrounds and disciplines, we share many commonalities regarding the debate as a teaching strategy. This little section right here I put as future research. This is something you definitely want to see with any kind of educational research piece. This is the springboard that many people who are working on a PhD or a master's thesis will say, what am I doing my research on? And many articles that do research, at the end of their research article, will have what's called a springboard. And what they're saying is, anyone who's reading this article, if you want to do future research, we recommend doing it on these topics. So this is kind of a really cool thing to do if you're ever lost on doing a research paper, because many research articles will have what's called a springboard or ideas for future research. Now, one warning on this, if you're reading this article and it's 1988 and it says future research, that probably has already been done or gone away. But I will say this, you can find some articles from the 70s and 80s that have future research that no one ever did any on, and you can go ahead and re-hit that, and that's something that's also good for a career. Online debates are innovative and enjoyable for students and professors, and then it continues on with their concluding sentence. I love reading a concluding sentence because it's kind of the last thing someone writes, also the most powerful piece. However, further research is needed on this teaching strategy, not only in terms of faculty perceptions and experiences, but also in terms of students' perceptions and experiences. So you see that this is a really good research piece because it talks about online debate, and it talks about it from a perception of 3 faculty members. But what we definitely see from this research piece is there is a need for more examinations of debates online. For example, how, and I don't need to give you examples because this author right here gives you all kinds of examples to do. So it's a really fun little piece to do. Hopefully as you read this, or if you read it again, you saw some things that I missed. I'll just go over this one little thing right here. This is the reference page that all research articles go through in education. And just to let you see what this is about is you have their name, the year it was written, you have the title of the article, and you have the journal. So for example, Bannis and Emory, 98, History and Issues of Distance Learning, and then you have Public Administrative Quarterly, Volume 22, Issue 3, and then the page numbers. So therefore, as a researcher, if I'm reading this article and I want to go find that source, I should be able to go find that source. And as you scroll down, the article concludes with more and more sources, and this usually comes from the research, the review literature. I don't know where this school is, but I'm sure I could find it if I type it in. But there it is, and that's the research article on, and I'll scroll back up so you can see the title. Debate as a Teaching Strategy in Online Education, a Case Study. And this is printed in published in 2011. So it's kind of a, we have a new article and it talks about debate. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and I'll put some more lectures up, but this is a very quick, according to my clock, a nice little 35-minute discussion on a research article about debate. So now I'll close this. And at this point my mind is thinking, I hope everything recorded. And I'll go ahead and stop it.